I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us for tonight's event. I'm Emily. I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's. Before we begin, I just want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming events by visiting our website at powells.com. We're looking forward to welcoming Rob Bell on September 17th and Tiffany D. Cross on September 18th, among others. Please do remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. As well, if you haven't already done so, you may sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Tonight, we're very honored to welcome Joanna Rose in conversation with Susan Leslie Moore. Joanna Rose is the author of the award-winning novel Little Miss Strange, which earned the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association Award and was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. She established the Powell's Books reading series and curated it for 15 years. Susan Leslie Moore is the winner of the 2019 Juniper Prize in Poetry, and her first full-length collection, That Place Where You Opened Your Hands, was published by University of Massachusetts Press. A Small Crowd of Strangers, Joanna Rose's second novel, is part love story, part slightly sideways spiritual journey. I love the alliteration there, by the way. And this evening's event is also going to include a Q&A. There's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, try clicking the more, it will show up there. As well, if someone else asks a question that you'd like to know the answer to, please upvote that question. The questions with the most upvotes will show up at the top of the list. And perhaps most importantly, please consider supporting Joanna Rose and Powell's by purchasing a copy of A Small Crowd of Strangers. A link to buy the book will be shared in the chat multiple times this evening. Now please welcome Joanna Rose and Susan Leslie Moore.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you, pals. And Joanna, congratulations on the publication of your book. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight and to be with 125 participants whose names I know you're out there, so thank you for being here. Let's get started. I know you wanted to start us off.
So yeah, thank you so much, everybody who's out there that I don't get to see. Thank you, Powell's, and thank all of you who are out there in this strange place and this strange time. Now, to start, anyone who's ever been in a class of mine knows that I like to start with a poem. And so I will, because I can, and because I'm here in conversation with a poet. I kind of think of starting with a poem as a way to evoke the muse of language, which would be erato. It's kind of like starting with a prayer. Excuse me. And because I want to speak to this time of waiting and fire and hope, I'm going to turn to William Stafford. This is his poem, Forestry. Old cedars, when the storms come, hum a fervent anthem about the good years, the good life then. Little trees rustle among stately trunks that hardly move, only a slow wind curtsy. They hike, the big ones, far over the pass on good days, down to a farm's edge at evening. People walk out and find the trees discussing religion and how to hold your arms when it rains. Okay, my poet friend, let's begin.
Started. So Joanna, this novel takes the reader on such a great adventure, and I found myself that I fell in love with Pattianne Anthony right from the beginning. It starts in New Jersey. She's 30. It ends up in Vancouver Island. And yeah, as Emily said, it's about being in love and not being in love, and it's about having faith and not having faith. And I was interested in an interview I saw that I read online where you said that you referred to her, Pattianne, as less a thinker and more a dreamer. And I thought about that, and I think that's true, but I do see her as a dreamer, but I also see her as a thinker making some very deliberate choices. And she's very decisive about what she wants and what she doesn't want. And I was interested in, did you know, what about her journey surprised you? And did you know from the start what she was going to end up wanting? And how did that kind of evolve for you?
Well, pretty much everything about her journey surprised me because I really didn't start out with it being a journey. I actually started the story at the end. It was going to be a framed novel kind of about living with shame, which I think is such a powerful state of mind. And I wanted to let, excuse me, I wanted to let the memories pile up in her head and see how she kind of sorted through them. My idea was to look for emotional transitions, how one memory led to another. And sometimes memory is a playful thing. Sometimes memory calls up other memory for no apparent reason. The mind can be irreverent. And I find the idea of memory fascinating. How it's said when you remember something, you're possibly not remembering the actual event, but you're remembering the last time you remembered that event. And how scent can evoke such a strong memory just because the olfactory system is in the same part of the brain as the part that affects emotions and memory and creativity. And I'm interested in how unreliable memory is. So for one whole draft of this novel, the whole first draft, I kept writing scenes that were memories. And it was a powerful way to get to know the characters. It's how we get to know the people we meet. We share the stories of our lives and our memories. And, and it's, well, for instance, I have siblings who seem to have been raised in a completely different family than me.
Yes.
That's always interesting. But as I worked on that draft, I became aware that all those memories piling up, they didn't have story energy. They didn't have the power of cause and effect, the drive of cause and effect. So at one point, this was in another draft, I put all those memories in chronological order. And that's when it became a different story for me. Things happened for a reason at that point. And the conflict that was inherent in one memory caused the next problem. And at that point, you might say I was seduced by the plot in my characters' lives. I think that's what happens in a story. We get seduced by the plot.
Seduced by the plot.
Yeah, it's biological. At a point in our evolution, if we weren't paying attention to the plot, we became somebody's dinner. So plot, I think we're hardwired to pay attention to plot. And that story led me to exploring her marriage and her faith.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to think about. Thinking about plot as a way to get away from that animal chasing us. But I'd love to have you read the very beginning of it. Could you read a selection just from, just start us off right where it starts? They were called Peeps.
I would love to. This is chapter 1, which is called, They Were Called Peeps. It was things like reading all of John Updike and all of Elmore Leonard and doing the crossword puzzle in the middle of the afternoon when she didn't have to work, with the all classical station pouring out of the windows of her apartment over the dry cleaners. That's what being 30 was about. That's what finally being finished with grad school was about. Pattianne kept her part-time job at the library of the education lab, which paid just enough and technically made use of her shiny new master's degree in library science. And she kept her sometimes boyfriend, Stephen. Even Stephen, she called him, because he was so even-tempered, which was really him not caring very much one way or another about her being his girlfriend or them being a couple, or really anything besides arguing about almost everything. The only good book ever written was Under the Volcano, he might say, or something like that, after about the third scotch. He loved that book. Yeah, if you're a depressed drunk looking for a good reason to commit suicide, she'd say, or something like that, after about the third vodka tonic. Pattianne hated that book. He also liked having just enough drinks to have really nice sex. Nice, he would say, nice. He owned a tavern with a bunch of guys who had dropped out of law school together, a laid-back, uncollege type of place called the Truck Yard. On a breezy afternoon in early March, she stopped by the Truck Yard on her way to work with her new find, Requiem in D minor. She was discovering she loved Mozart. Even Stephen had played violin in high school and fancied himself a musician, even though all he played now was the stereo. He poured her a glass of Chardonnay, and then he put Mozart in the CD player. He leaned against the back bar and stared through his smudgy glasses at the ceiling. It was the beginning of the part of the Requiem Mass that was called the introitus, coming on so low that she wondered if something was wrong with the CD player. Even Stephen leaned against the bar and ran his fingers through his thick, dark hair. It stood up in a sexy mess. She got that dreamy, damp feeling and thought about calling in sick. Library jobs were like that, a little too easy to call in sick, but at 28 hours a week, also easy to catch up on work. About 3 minutes later, though, even Stephen took the CD out and slipped it back into its case. He set the case gently on the bar in front of her and tapped his finger on it, leaving it smeared with grated cheese. He leaned over the bar and whispered in her ear, "That's a shitty orchestra." Two guys at the end of the bar watched. Even Stephen took out another CD and slipped it into the player. Same music, coming on so achingly slow. "This," he said, with a grand gesture toward the stereo, "is the greatest recording of the Requiem in D minor that you'll ever hear." The guys at the end of the bar applauded. Pattianne sighed in what she hoped was a melodramatic way and picked up her CD. "You got cheese on my Mozart," she said. She slipped off her bar stool. "I got to go to work." Even Stephen winked at her, cute and annoying at the same time. Amazing how he could do that. And as she went out the truck yard door, Mozart blared behind her, even Stephen jacking up the volume. The spring breeze blew grit into her eyes, along with the smell of the Passaic River. When she got to the library, she took the CD out and looked at it. "Alas," she said to Melissa. Melissa was the intern at the table next to her, and she loved hearing even Stephen's stories. Melissa also loved black roses, had several, in fact, tattooed on her left arm, and she had a big plastic one pinned to her messenger bag. This one she now unpinned and handed over, saying, "Requiem for an afternoon of lust." Pattianne made a shrine in her in basket with the CD, its case with the blue and yellow painting of Mary and Jesus propped up reverently behind the black rose. And then, not an hour later, on a warm, windows open for the first time kind of spring day, he came into the North Jersey Regional Education Lab, wafting on a scent of soap. She'd seen him around, him with his pretty face and black hair. She didn't know his name until she saw it written there on the pink request form in perfect cursive. A breeze started to lift the request form off the desk, and they both reached for it. He touched it first and held it down with 2 fingers. "Hello," he said. "They told me at the front desk you could help me access this database. Are you Patty Anthony?" "No," she said. He had red lips, shaped like a bow. "I mean, database, yes. Patty, no, it's Pattianne." She was thinking, access is not a verb, it's a noun. She said, "Let me set you up with this access code." If she moved her hand 1 inch, their fingers would touch.
That is great.
And so it begins.
And so it begins. You know, several times it was funny. A quote came to me when I was reading this. At what point, the Aldous Huxley quote about when the individual feels, the community reels. And I thought about that in terms of Patty. She just kind of does what she wants, but she's also Pattianne. She's also she wants community, and she thinks about community and how and wanting to find a community. And I wonder how that idea of community kind of plays out for Pattianne. If you could talk a little bit about how that became important.
Well, I think community is always a puzzle to her. I mean, her family was certainly a puzzle to her. And I think she comes really slowly to understanding her place in any community. I think when you start out with a tavern as your community, that's kind of, a way of not having a community in a way. And the great tragedy of this story is how she totally misses her part in the communities around her. I mean, I especially loved writing the last 2 parts of the story when community really comes into play, when she starts ending up in communities without meaning to, and because of her, by virtue of just being there, because of being Michael's wife or living in this small town, she becomes part of the community, all those strangers. And that was a surprise to me. I loved writing about those people and how they reacted to her and she to them. And I think in writing about them, that's how they became the community. And I loved letting them become important to the story. And that way, instead of my original idea of having her just walk on the beach, pondering the depths of her misdeeds, it really became a story of how she interacted and became part of these communities.
I see that. And I also, I thought it was really interesting the way you made the other characters. I think what made it so engaging is even though she was pushing against others' expectations, you also had sympathy for the people that her decisions were affecting, or the people that were coming into contact with her, and how they worked everything out. And I wonder if you could talk about how you were able to make those other characters sympathetic, even though what they wanted was so different than what she wanted.
Well, it was interesting because what she wanted really was to not be part of, she didn't want relationships. She didn't really want to have these communities. And she just kept finding herself in the middle of them. I started out telling the story just from her point of view in first person. First person, I have to say, it was a really big deal when we were all working together with Tom Spanbauer back in the 90s. We were all writing in first person. But then in one subsequent draft, I made her and her husband separate characters, and I told their stories in third person. It was kind of like being a rebel, but it was also an experiment to say, well, let's see how this will change the story. And it really did change the story. A little distance from the characters, as opposed to just telling it right from their point of views looking out. That's when the real story really took off for me. It kind of took in the whole community once it turned into a third person story. And Pattianne and Michael's confusion and their missteps were more believable, more human from the distance of third person. And I really wanted to show her struggling with the complex doubts and feelings about family and motherhood and her role as a woman. It was kind of at the core of this story for a long time. And I think that's one place where our books intersect. Her understanding of domestic life, which doesn't answer your question about making characters sympathetic. I realize that. I think it's an obligation of the writer to not be judgmental of their characters, to not tell the reader what to think. I like characters who are complex, how right and wrong can seem subjective. And I think when we as readers experience on a human level, a character who is making a big mistake, it creates conflict in the heart of the reader and not just conflict on the page. And I wanted to show that. I wanted to show how we explore our own thoughts and our experiences and how we don't always see a very good way through a mess. And family is such a reliable mess to explore. And, you know, it's this endlessly fascinating mess to explore. So, and at this point, I'd like to ask you to read a poem.
Oh, okay.
So my first experience with your work was at a panel that you were on in Portland, at Portland Book Festival, way back in the day. It was when it was at the convention center. And it was a panel on poetry chapbooks. And you had just published She Preferred to Read the Knives. And the poem that charmed me sitting in that room that day was called Kitchen. And the line that resonated was, tomorrow I'll find a lid for every pan and line them up on the front porch to let the neighbors know I have everything under control. And I feel like, I mean, I love that image. And I also feel it's so much part of my story in this book, because both Pattianne and Michael are trying really hard to be people that other people think they should be, and they want to be those people for other people. And then there's this line from The Naturalist's Notebook, which is your new book, that place where you opened your hands. This is from the poem from The Naturalist's Notebook, Propagation. My children hunt for me up the stairs and down. And it certainly rings true to my ideas and Pattianne's about the questions of motherhood and family and how kids keep popping up in her life. They just keep showing up, whether she wants them to or not. But there's also this. I moved not very long ago into a 2-story house, and I'm always having to run up and down stairs because whatever I need is on the other floor. And that line runs through my head like a mantra. Your poem is part of the DNA of my days.
Oh.
So I'd like you to read Self-Portrait as Math.
Okay, thank you. This is Self-Portrait as Math. Equate me with nothing, I can't be a sign. Don't solve me for X, solve me for Y. I want to count my bad decisions. I want to count what can't be numbered. How many times have I left my old self behind, only to discover her trailing behind me? She knows me better. She knows my selves diverge even on a straight line. That person I wanted to be, baking loaves of bread for all the lost orphans, armed with a sturdy wisdom, subtract her. Subtract patience. Add the crows that call and urge me to follow. Add the shiny coins I can't stop collecting at every intersection. I never have enough pockets to hold them.
Oh, thank you. I love that poem.
Thank you.
And there are lines in it that ring so true for me. I found so many connections between our two books. The lines, I want to count my bad decisions, which is, of course, where I started my novel, with Pattianne just up there counting her bad decisions by herself on a beach. And how many times have I left my old self behind to discover her trailing behind me? So much of your book is about witnessing our own becoming and questioning it non-judgmentally and being willing to sit with doubt. And I think that's one of the places where our works connect. And of course, there are crows.
Well, I think in general, poetry does lend itself to questioning. And so there is probably a connection there. Also, my book was put together over several years. So maybe there's more space in it for it to wander a little bit, which also kind of fits in with Pattianne's wandering. But I wanted to get back to the humor in this book, which was something that I just really enjoyed. There were so many funny scenes, and she seems to like struggle to fit in and almost not seeing herself. You feel like as the reader, you can kind of step outside, see herself and see what she's doing in you. And the fact that she doesn't quite see it herself is part of what lends it the humor. So we're almost laughing a little at her.
Yeah. She has the good fortune to run into funny people.
But I wondered if you could read a little bit from it's the soiree at the house of the principal of the school where her husband works.
Yes. This part takes place in the second part of the book, which is in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And this is from Pattianne's point of view again. And it's at a gathering at the home of Michael's new principal. He's gotten a job teaching at a small private school. It was a soiree at the home of the principal. Joseph Garrison stood next to a wildly blooming scarlet trumpet vine. She remembered him from the first faculty get-together. He had teased her about looking sleepy, and she had tried to blame the heat. She wandered over to him. So, he said, everyone is here. It was cool down in the grass by her feet. He said, how's the New Age business? He was the third person to call Lamplighter Books a New Age bookstore. What does that mean, really? She said. New Age of what? The age of Aquarius? It's all pretty ancient stuff. Ha! Joseph had been eating crudités with roasted garlic spread. He said, very funny, age of Aquarius. I haven't heard those words for at least 25 years. And you're getting quick, too. It's my feet. They're cool. This was a no-kids party. There was a keg of beer called Goose Island, and there was white wine in huge wine glasses. No vodka, though, no orange juice. Seriously, she said. He said, don't seriously me about Elizabeth's bookstore. Not with her over there doing the Priestess of Delphine number on your husband. Elizabeth was standing across the garden, wearing a long straight dress, a string of coral beads around her neck, and sandals on her feet, no bells. She did look a little Greek. She and Michael stood next to each other and a couple other people. Elizabeth's two small hands held one of the round white wine glasses. Michael held a beer. He was telling a story. They all watched him. Okay, Pattianne said, so let's talk about the weather. The cloudless sky was stained clear red. The sun was down. The humidity was closing in. It's fabulous, said Joseph, and looked straight up. Red sky reflected in his glasses for a moment. It's too hot. When does it cool down around here? Don't ask me, he said. I just teach it. Mosquito whined around her arm and she slapped at it, and the white wine sloshed on her dress. Joseph said, nice move. The wine didn't show, though, lost among the green leaf designs in the material, besides it being white wine. She said, don't you teach biology? And one class of poetry. Biology and poetry? He said, the language arts teacher is afraid of poetry. He touched her elbow. Wander aimlessly, he said, and he steered her out into the middle of things. Mr. Smith, he said, coming our way, don't look. A teenager in a black apron with a tray of empty glasses headed toward them. He said, I said, don't look. The grass was smooth, like walking on carpet. So, Earth Sciences second term, he said. His fingers on her elbow were a light touch. First term, I get their attention by teaching them about sex. Second term, I poison their minds by teaching them evolution. They moved together around and through people who seemed to be saying hello without stopping their conversations. She said, who's Mr. Smith? A girl in a black apron filled their glasses with white wine from a carafe and then turned away, working her way through all the people, leading with her carafe. She wore a long-sleeved white shirt, a black bow tie, and black slacks. The carafe sweated. Pattianne got hot just looking at her. She said, this is really sweet wine. Riesling, Joseph said, a nice little breakfast wine. I must say it goes well with your dress. The buffet table was draped in white, laid with white china platters and little foodie things, silver tongs and forks. Carrot coins, Joseph said. That usually means we're in the vicinity of artichoke heart dip. Now, Mr. Smith is the one back there talking to the woman in the red dress. He's probably lecturing her on the evil of red dresses. Pattianne picked her hair up off the back of her neck, wanted an elastic, a hair clip, a short haircut. There were 3 women in red dresses and one that was kind of a rose color. Which one's Mr. Smith? School chaplain, Joseph said. Aha! He picked up a small bowl of green dip. Grab those carrot coins. She dropped her hair back down onto her neck and picked up the dish of carrot coins. Right this way, he said, and they were moving again, this time toward Michael and Elizabeth. So, Pattianne said, you don't get along with the school chaplain because why? Joseph said, I happen to like red dresses.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So there's obviously a lot of humor in the book, but I guess what looms even larger, of course, is the questions of faith. And I'm curious, the Catholicism that Pattianne comes into contact with and is in Michael's family, did you do research for that, or is that informed by your life experiences? Or I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Kind of both. I was raised Catholic, and my family kind of became lapsed Catholics by the time I was about 13. And exploring Catholicism in this story was a way to celebrate my own relationship with the church. I loved going to Mass when I was little. The music, the Latin chanting, the mysterious holy days, the architecture, the stained glass windows. I loved seeing my mother get dressed up on Sundays. I loved the stories of the Gospels, not a single one of which I ever believed, but still, it was beautiful sitting in this place that was literally designed to inspire awe. And some man in beautiful flowing robes up there on the altar with candles and flowers, telling what I essentially considered fairy tales. And I was of the generation that was raised on fairy tales. I could never get enough of them. So, I mean, for me, Catholicism was right up there with Alice in Wonderland and Hans Christian Andersen. So there was that. And we kind of fell away from the Catholic Church along about the time of Vatican II, which was when everything got boring as far as I was concerned. They quit doing it in Latin. It just changed a lot. And I left the church completely behind for a long time until the early 90s, when I spent quite a few years really studying the history of Christology. As a non-believer, you really have to wonder how that whole phenomenon came about, right? And there was a Jesus scholar in Portland named Dr. Marcus Borg. He was a major figure in New Testament theology, and we were lucky that he lived here. And I and a few of my friends were like total Marcus Borg groupies. We would always go to his lectures. He was fascinating. He made the life of Jesus fascinating, even to a non-believer.
So did you find yourself thinking about any of that differently after living with Pattianne and Michael's marriage and everything that she witnessed? Did it change how you viewed any of that for yourself? I'm just curious.
No, it didn't. It brought it into focus. It brought it into focus for me. It made me feel like, well, I hate to say it, but it made me feel like I'm right about it. But in this novel, it was a pleasure to go back into that and kind of let my characters explore their feelings about the church and Christology and the divinity of Christ.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot there that it would take us hours, I think, to even talk about all the different aspects of that comes up in the novel. But it's so engaging and compelling, though, and then there's the humor in it. So it's just such a joy to read. So I wondered if you could talk about the journey that the book took. How did this book end up here?
That was, well, okay.
I've heard a rumor that novels take a long time to write. I don't
Most of them do. Most of them do. This one took longer than a long time to write. I actually started this novel before I published Little Miss Strange. Little Miss Strange was in the hands of about 5 different publishers. And the first one that we heard back from, I think it was Viking Penguin, rejected it, saying it was too much of a hippie story and no one would be interested in a child narrator. And of course I was crushed. And I remember I got the letter and I tossed it on the kitchen table. And then I just went back to my desk and I started working on this story. I said, well, I'm going to start a novel with an adult narrator. And fine, that novel won't get published. I know that a lot of first novels don't get published. Then about half an hour later, I heard from Algonquin, and who also had it. And they, they called to say that they wanted it. And Algonquin, I have to say, was my dream publisher. Literally, I had a dream that I looked at Shannon Ravenel, who was my editor, and said, I want Algonquin to publish my book. So essentially, I suffered about half an hour of rejection. And then I had to spend about 2 years revising and getting Little Miss Strange out into the world before I got back to this story. And, there were so many other things happened around then. I started working with writers in the schools, and I really got into working with high school kids and teaching writing. for a while, I kind of would set this novel down for a while. And I was writing short stories for a while, and then I was writing essays. And I spent about 4 years really focused on the study of poetry with David Biospiel at the Attic. And then I would pick it back up. I would find I could never really quite let go of it. And then the next thing you know, 20 years went by, and I finally finished it. And that was when I submitted it to Forest Avenue Press. And I first met Laura Stanfill, the publisher of Forest Avenue Press, when she was newly arrived to the West Coast. She had been working as managing editor at the Newport News, and then she moved to Portland, and she was working on a very funny, very dark, messy story about the editor of a small town newspaper. And she became so solidly part of the Portland writing community, first as a really talented, funny writer, and now as a publisher. She's just a true force. She's what Portland writer Susie Vitello called a testament to the persistence of beauty. Her first publishing venture was Brave on the Page, Oregon Writers on Craft and the Creative Life. And that was a Powell Small Press bestseller for 4 months. And it was named #1 book of 2012 by the Powell's on Oregon blog. Forest Avenue Press was awarded a 2014 Oregon Literary Fellowship. She's just released a really beautiful book called Sad House, Parenting, Grief, and Creativity in the Coronavirus Crisis, which was published by Microcosm Publishing. She's published 17 titles since 2012. The catalog includes story collections, anthologies, novels, and memoir. And the pleasure of working so closely with the publisher is an experience that I was really hungry for the longer I watched Forest Avenue Press work. I mean, I loved working with Algonquin, and they were great. But this close personal relationship, every step of the way with Forest Avenue Press was just so rich. Like the artist who designed the cover, Gigi Little, she brought my memories to life. The copy editor, Maya Myers, made me a better Scrabble player. And Forest Avenue Press is indie. As with independent booksellers, it feels like home to be part of a movement that I think art is returning to for the first time in a long time. So that's this book's journey.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And are you, I just wonder what's in the works now? Do you have a next project that you're working on?
I am. I have a new novel that I'm working on, but I'm also kind of going back and picking up some of the threads I dropped, stories and poetry. So they're all still kind of out there.
How does it feel to have Pattianne out in the world after having her just to yourself for a while?
It's amazing. It's amazing.
People need to make judgments on her and say things.
Yeah. You know, people are actually reading it. You know, I've been getting notes from people because it's only been out a couple days. And it's amazing to think after all that time, she really found her way out into the world. And it's kind of like now she's sending me postcards. So I'm thinking that, what were you gonna say?
Go ahead. I'm just mindful of the time and want to make sure we get to questions. But.
Yeah, me too. And so I kind of want, I think that I want to end this with my thank you to you. I think story has always been a touch point for us in troubled times. And with language, we can make sense of the world and reach out to each other. And prose or poem, I think language can lead us to our humanity, which is why I want to ask you to finish with the poem, Why Poetry is Written in Lines.
Let's see. Okay. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Why is poetry written in lines? because a line is the shortest distance from language to that place where you opened your hands.
Oh, thank you. So amazing. That poem's just beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. I really appreciate your thoughtful responses, and we have lots of questions here. Let's see. So Brenna wants to know if there are any characters that took you by surprise while you were developing them, and if there are any characters that you have a soft spot for. Please don't say even Stephen.
I think one of the characters that took me by surprise was the first priest in the story, Father McGivens. And I think because I was prepared to make him kind of a bad guy. And he does come off as a very old school parish priest. And he goes through a lot of changes. But especially when I started seeing him from Michael's point of view, I was surprised to find out what a good, true person he is, and how clear-headed he is about what he sees as Michael's need. So he was definitely a surprise for me.
Mm-hmm. And then the next question, I feel like this is definitely writers asking these questions. How hard was it to become willing to change up the structure of the novel?
Oh, it was totally hard. It was so hard that I didn't even do it for a year. It was very clear that I needed to make it chronological for it to have a story, to have story energy. But I was so attached to that idea of these memories that were connecting in other ways that I resisted that for a year, knowing the whole time that it needed to be in chronological order. And then finally I just sat down and did it one day. And it didn't take very long. It only took a couple months to just keep moving scenes around. But yeah, I was stubborn about it. And I don't know why, because it was so much fun once I did it. It was like rediscovering this story that I already knew. And it was kind of a lesson for me when I work with other writers, saying, you know, if you don't like it, just don't erase the first draft. You can go back to it. But it's like I wasn't doing that. So yeah, that was very hard. It was very hard.
I was going to say, oh, it was easy. But I understand it would not be easy at all. But I think the idea of like that you can always go back to the draft, that it's always there. It's not like you have to, it's not like you're giving up on that entirely. So
no, and it's almost like we forget that. We
Yeah.
think if we change it, it's going to be changed for good. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
And you don't even really lose track of it.
Right.
That first
and it informs, you know, subsequent drafts.
It's all part of the journey.
Okay, so I'm reading the questions. And if you have questions, if you can put them in the Q&A, because that's where I'm reading from.
And I'm not, so thank you, Susan. Thank you so much.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, do you have tips for writing good comedic scenes? How do you know it's funny, not just funny to you? Story of my life.
Yeah. I don't have tips for writing funny. I'm always surprised when things turn out funny. I know my first novel, which I was amazed that people would laugh at things in that story, that poor little girl. I think that what I said earlier, she ran into a lot of funny people. And I think what is funny is maybe that juxtaposition of personalities. Conflict can be funny. But I can't do funny on purpose. I have worked with a lot of writers, some of whom are really funny, and it's just mystical to me how it happens. So no, I don't know how to do funny. It just happens. I'm just lucky that my characters know funny people.
So here's another question about publishing. How is writing and publishing this book different from the process with Little Miss Strange? You touched on a little bit, but
yeah, The thing with Little Miss Strange was they took it. And then they, I went through the edit. I got a draft back from the editor, whom I have to say I trusted her completely, and that really made a big difference. Shannon Ravenel is known as a brilliant editor, and I was so thrilled. And I was so thrilled for the chance to work with her. So there was a lot of trust. She sent me back this manuscript, pieces of paper, all marked up, and explained why she was suggesting the cuts she was. And some of them were pretty dramatic. Like I had to take out a whole character. But I trusted her, and she explained what would happen if I took this out, how this scene would then bump up against this scene, and that would be terrific. But so we went back and forth that way just once. And then she accepted the revised manuscript. And the next thing I knew, it was in the advanced readers, in the uncorrected galley. And I had a little while with that and sent it back to her. There was no communication with the copy editor. Next thing I knew, the book was in my hands. So it all happened at a distance, with no phone calls even. It was all letters and paper going back and forth. With Forest Avenue Press, it was a conversation from the very beginning. When I sat down with Laura and she explained, she told me that she was accepting it. We were at a little tea shop out in Selwood, and we were sitting there talking about the book and talking about Forest Avenue Press. And it took me probably 15 minutes to realize she was actually saying she wanted it. Because it was a conversation about the book. And then everything after that was a conversation. The process with the copy editor was amazing. She sent me all these edits, and it turned into this conversation about, well, no, there are no Piggly Wiggly stores left in St. Cloud, but that's okay. And a big back and forth about the Scrabble game, because it turns out that she's an amazing Scrabble player, and she taught me so much about Scrabble, which I thought I knew everything about Scrabble. But it was, and then working with Gigi Little on the cover. Authors don't usually have much input on the covers. And she, she and Laura not only showed me different ideas they had and asked for my input, but when we finally settled on the bullfrog on the cover, he's based on my real dog, who I had when I was very young. And I actually showed her pictures of him, and she made this dog on the cover look just like my dog, which is really cool. There was just that kind of interaction every step of the way. And there still is. It was so personal. It was like Little Miss Strange was an amazing experience, but it was kind of lonely compared to this experience. That's the main thing about it. This isn't lonely.
That's awesome. So Beth has a question. I love this question. Why did you make Pattianne a librarian? I also wondered in the book where you said as a librarian it's easier to call in sick. I was waiting for all the pushback from the librarian community there. But why did you make her a librarian? I'm curious. Was she, in your mind, was she always a librarian?
No, she wasn't. But I wanted her to have a job that she could kind of step away from. A part-time job in a reference library seemed like a good one for that. I wanted her to have spent a little too long getting her degree, and I guess all graduate degrees can be like that. In the second part of the book, she gets a job in this New Age bookstore, and I didn't want her to start out in a bookstore, but I wanted it to be reasonable for her to get to that bookstore, because that bookstore figures very importantly into what happens in the next part of the book. So I'd have to say mainly I made her a librarian so she could get a job at a bookstore. With apologies to librarians.
They aren't allowed to call in sick ever, just so we're clear. So someone wants to know if you'd ever want to revisit any of the characters, and what would there be a spin-off for this book or some kind of sequel?
I can't imagine doing that. I'm already on to the next novel and it's nothing like this. And I was never compelled in any way to revisit any of the characters in Little Miss Strange. So no, I don't think so. There are, a few moments in this book that turned into essays. And there was in Little Miss Strange, there was a story. It turned into a short story about how those characters met, but not beyond that. No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so we have a question from our Mary Reckner who wants to know, have your preoccupations, here, wait, I'm gonna, just a minute here, so I can read the whole thing. Have your preoccupations and obsessions remained the same over time or changed, ? Well, for me, I can say that David Cassidy is no longer an obsession. That's changed. But no, I think writers, and maybe you can speak to this a little too, Joanna, I think writers kind of find their obsessions and they're kind of marked by their obsessions early on, and then they just kind of spin out in different ways. Over the years, they shift or they change. I mean, I imagine that there's going to be some exploration of religion or some aspect of faith in your next book. So I think we are kind of marked a little bit early on.
Yeah. I can't imagine a book without a dog. I don't know. When I started writing this book, one of my goals was to write a book that was very different from Little Miss Strange because they'd rejected Little Miss Strange. And I find that I've written yet another book about a search for a family community. So maybe that as an important obsession will never leave. I think for me, I keep kind of looking for new obsessions. But I don't know if I leave the old ones behind.
You probably just layer them.
And
layering that goes on.
They go from being obsessions to being habits, and then they, go from being habits to being stories, and maybe they circle back around. There was a quote that Tom Spanbauer used to love to share with us by Pablo Neruda, who said, "The poet spends his whole life describing his own face." And I think that speaks to the possibility that, no, we never do leave our obsessions behind. And maybe trying to leave our obsessions behind is part of that, part of not leaving them behind.
That's a great way to put it. I think we have time. Let's see. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Scott Sparling asked, how does being a teacher and a writer interact for you? And does one make the other harder or easier, or both? And Joanna, I know you've been involved with teaching writing in many different formats and venues for a long time. So how does that work for you?
Well, working with adult writers is like my education in how to write. Being able to be with people and as they explore how to put their stories on the page is this ongoing education in how story can work. So that's hugely helpful to me as a writer. What I see people doing is trying new things that I'd never thought of. And it's not so much that I think, oh, I'm going to try that too. Although I do. It's mostly seeing people brave enough to try new things week after week and bring their pages into the workshop, and put themselves out in front of other people in the critique group and open themselves to new ways of writing. When we, share our ideas of how something on the page could work, and I see people go, oh yeah, okay, I'll try that. I'm so impressed by people's courage and perseverance that I think it's mostly inspirational. Now, teaching with youth, that's a whole other story. For 19 years, working with high school writers was so brilliant. because their writing is so brilliant. I mean, they'll just say anything, and their misuse of language is often so poetic that it just reveals them. And they'll start right out writing the hardest story there is to write. And I just fall in love with language over and over again when I'm working with youth writers. It's just so brilliant. And I feel like my job with youth writers, because I'm a teaching artist, not a classroom language arts teacher, is I don't have to worry about their grammar or their vocabulary. I just have to tell them how brilliant they are and try to get them to understand why what they write is good. So it's this big love fest all the time. And it's distracting because they're so dazzling. It is to work with teenage writers. That I have to say that made it hard to be a writer.
There's a lot of joy there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just writing for the sake of the fun of writing, I think, and just trying new things. It's probably
just writing because I told them to.
Yeah.
This is the assignment. I go, okay, right. That's just brilliant.
Okay, I'm going to ask last question, I think, from Nancy, who wants to know, Nancy Townsley, who asks, what's the most important thing? Always a tough question. What's the most important thing the characters in your novel have to say about adult sibling relationships, particularly during times of loss?
I think that what they would have to say by the end of the story, when they've learned a little bit, maybe, is that you can count on relationships to be confusing and painful, and that they're worth working on, that they're worth not walking away from. I think that's something that might be, that rings true in all of my stories, that it's easy to walk away, and it's important to either not walk away or really think hard about why you're walking away. But in this book especially, I think the relationships, they're confusing, and you might as well not try to resist. That's a tough question, Nancy.
That's a great, I know. I was like, Nancy, I like, I think we are creeping on 7. How are we doing? A lot. Julianne Weaver says, such a great reading and talk. Thank you. And Kelly Wallace says, love hearing more about your publishing experience and work with editors. And Mark wants to know if you, oh wait, here's another one. Mark wants to know if you plan to get re-involved with teens again.
I don't plan on it specifically right now, but I hope so. I hope there will always be youth writers in my life. Yeah.
And
because they're so much fun. They're just a hoot.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, yeah, and you've gave so much to that young writers in the schools. It's just amazing. I think that is all the questions. A lot of thank yous, which are lovely to see. This has just been a total joy to be here with you. I feel like I haven't thought about air quality for about 45 minutes now.
Oh my God, you're right. I haven't either. That's right. No, this has been amazing. It's amazing that we can do this, that we can't get together, but that we can still do this, and that you are here.
I think we're fortunate to be at a certain level with our technology when the pandemic hits. I mean, if we didn't have all these opportunities, it'd be a lot bleaker.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Susan. This was great. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Powells.
Thank you, Powells. Now it's that funny time when you leave a Zoom meeting when everybody stares at everybody for a while as they disappear.
Like, where did everybody go? Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you all for all your questions and being here. was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Miriam, for the signing. That was wonderful to
And thank
watch.
you, Joanna and Susan. That was a wonderful conversation. That was so great. And thank you, Miriam, for the amazing ASL interpretation. Please do consider buying a copy of A Small Crowd of Strangers on Powells.com. We will have a recording of this if you want to revisit it. It'll be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And please do check out our other upcoming events. We hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good night, everyone, and stay safe out there.
Good night. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.